We want to welcome you to another episode of the Family Business Podcast with the Alessis. And this is a lot of fun today because we're talking about family business, because family is everybody's business. And today it's Christopher and I sitting around the table, and we're going to be talking about something that we cannot talk about on Sundays. If you are a member of what we do, our organization, our business, we don't talk about this, but we both talk on Sundays. So we're going to be talking about communicating, how both of us are sharing in the communication roles here at the church that we pastor, and how we make room for the gift that is similar to my main gift as the senior leader. So, Chris, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Good to be here today. I'm excited for this topic. This is going to be interesting. This is one, again, we have Kenny. Some people have submitted the name Benny. I'm keeping Kenny.
What was Benny for?
Benny Hannes.
No. The Bulls.
The Bulls mascot. Benny
the Bull.
But I don't know. But I like
Don't
this
confuse me, because I'll call him Kenny and then Benny.
His name is Kenny.
And then Penny.
His name is Kenny.
Kenny.
That's his name until Instagram tells us.
And the reason Kenny is on the desk is because we're going to be talking about something that, with many leaders that do come alongside each other and work together, especially in our line of work, this is really an issue that causes problems.
Oh, yeah.
Problems for the senior generation and even the next generation coming up behind them. And it could be a bone of contention.
Yeah.
And what we're going to be talking about, Chris, is this. You and I are communicators. Now, if you look at my role in the organization as the senior leader, my role is really to communicate in the services on the weekend. Your role is more of an assistant to come along with what the senior leader needs. And then, because you're a campus pastor, like Armando is at our Dadeland campus, you're the campus pastor in our Doral campus, your role is everything campus related.
Yep.
But early on, I don't know if it was 16 or 17, early on, you were given the platform when you were leading the youth to start communicating and speaking. And you started at that level. And I even have notes in my phone that I took. And one of the notes were just things you would do back then when you would speak publicly, fidgeting, flicking your nose, all that kind of stuff, your stories, your humor, your jokes. I could go through it. Actually, I did the other night with Manny Paula as he and I were in the room at the end of one of our big events. The other thing I had were Christopherisms.
Yeah.
It's in my notes, things that you would that would be, okay, this could get in the way of him being a communicator.
And the joke wasn't that those were the crazy things I used to do. The joke was that...
still do some of those
things.
And we're talking, gosh, man, 12 years ago.
Well, my first sermon, I was 18. You asked me before I went to Southeastern, you asked me to preach a message. Now, I was a worship leader, and at that time, I thought the appropriate way to lead worship was to speak for 6 or 7 minutes to get people involved.
Yeah.
But my first sermon was 18, and then I got to doing it pretty regularly, really when I was 20.
Yeah. So in our organization, what usually happens, the senior leader holds that position until the day he moves on.
Yep.
Okay. But what we have found is those early years really allowed you to hone in on a skill that you enjoyed. Not just speaking. This is where I want to make sure people who hear me understand. This is not about you being a speaker, okay? This is about you being a communicator. Taking something that is very spiritual and putting it in a way that communicates understanding what is spiritual, but very practically.
Yeah.
So you take the spiritual, you make it practical, and you do so with an ability that really surpasses your years. All right? So what do? How do I manage that when me as the senior leader looks at the junior coming up behind me that has a gift and skill? Do I just leave it for the young people? Or do I look and think, wait a minute, one, he needs to develop it to its fullest potential because that's going to be his role in the future. And two, these people need it. Our organization needs it. Well, I chose not to leave it for just the younger generation. I chose to start to introduce it a few years ago into the senior generation so that our whole church family at both campuses are able to receive the information that you are communicating. And at the same time, it's preparing for you, the future. And I wanted to do that, but I had to be very careful too, because I didn't want you to burn out. Because our line of work, that if you're preaching every week, that's 50 messages you come up with every year. You do that for 10 years, that's 500 messages. And you're tempted to go back and repeat, but it's not easy. You still got to get up. So you got a long road ahead of you.
Yeah.
So, how do we navigate that, Chris?
Well, I think the first part of navigating it was understanding the training aspect of it. So I was given a training ground, and truth be told, you really did give me a lot of room. You gave me a lot of room to just figure things out. Now, that was not a space lacking accountability. I couldn't just do whatever I wanted.
Marcus, Alan's son, is bringing us some hot coffee. Thank you, Marcus.
Gotta love it. So when we say training ground, it wasn't a place, lacking accountability. You would reference how long I would preach. I did have 3 sisters who would come home and tattletale. So if I did preach too long, they would get home before I would, and you would know about it. So it didn't lack accountability, but you did give me an opportunity to really hone the craft, to practice every week, to figure things out. You also were very, very intentional about training me to do it right, not training me to be you. And that was one of the really cool differences between my dad and some of my other friends' dads. You were able, and I don't know how, so you have to speak to it. You were able to say, these are the right ways to preach. And this is how you, as the mature, experienced pastor, do it. But I can find my own way, in the way that my brain works, the way that I communicate. I for instance, you preach with a full manuscript, really. And the real amazing thing there is that on a Thursday or Friday, you can sit and really develop thoughts on paper. For whatever reason, I can't do that. I have no idea why. What I need to do is I need to develop things really just by talking to people, just in my mind throughout the day. And then Saturday night, Sunday morning, I have a little one sheet. This is just, before I leave here today, I need to say them, and I think this is the best order to do it. And it works for me. Your way works for you. So you were training me. You gave me room to really hone the craft. But I loved that you taught me to do things right. People do not realize how much you corrected my preaching. They don't see it. At the same time, I probably don't see just how much you didn't address. Because I did look at that list you sent me the other day and was like, I still do a lot of those things.
Do you see my face?
Yeah. So there was.
I'm holding this look.
Why? No, because I really do look at it. Okay, for instance, I did.
No, I'm going back to the manuscript for a second.
Okay.
You saying I can't do that for whatever reason, and yet you sit down and write a manuscript for a book.
Okay. Okay.
Come on.
But okay. I guess. Yeah. You win on that one.
Okay.
1 point for you. But it is.
And the only reason I bring that up is because every one of those sermons, that communication will one day be a book, and having that manuscript is great. Now you go back afterwards and you take your sermon and you have it put in a machine and it regurgitates everything in a written format.
I can't do that.
But because what you say lasts for one generation, what you write lasts for 2 generations.
I think you really helped me be the best version of me. So when I used to preach, I used to spend 20 minutes almost like in some kind of comedy routine, because it made me feel better. It made me feel like people were enjoying it.
And we said, Chris, that's your moment to connect with the crowd.
Yeah. So I was like, hey, that's what I want to do. And then the last 10 minutes, which is why the messages would go long, were me trying to now actually communicate a message. Now that I just joked about, something that happened in my life for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And people enjoyed it at the time. They would always be like, you're so funny. And I thought this was my thing.
All the parents in the room were like, oh, he's so cute.
Yeah. I really thought this was my thing. And I remember on one particular Sunday where I thought I had really done good. It was even a Monday night, I think, actually, not a Sunday. You came and you were like, "Mate, you've got to find a way to get out of that, like to stop doing that." Now, I think.
What do we call that? The long runway.
Oh, yes.
It was a long runway for you to try to get this big thing up in the air.
And part of that wasn't because the message needed it, but because the messenger needed it. I didn't feel comfortable. But you found a way to say, okay, now while you didn't do that, you'd start preaching and get right into your message. You helped me find the best way to do that for me. Not saying, hey, do what I do, but think how I think. And however that comes out, because you have a different brain, praise God. But you do need to think how I think. I mean, Dad, you've been doing it so long, to rob me of all that training would be unfair.
Right.
But to try to make me into a mold that I don't fit in at the same time would be equally as unfair.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you did. How did you do that?
Well, I think for one thing, people ask, okay, how do you even prepare for a sermon? All right. So I know this as just in our line of work, I'm the shepherd.
Yeah.
And meaning I'm the leader of these sheep, the people in this organization. So the shepherd always leads. They're taking them somewhere, plus they're protecting them along the way, and they're feeding them. So I think in terms of this organization that I'm over and the people that I get to communicate with on the weekends are people that I'm in relationship with. They're looking to me for leadership, not just to feel good, but they're really looking for me from a leadership perspective. So my focus has always been, how can I communicate something to them that's going to feed them, make them feel good, give them energy, give them, strength, and then help them go in the direction that their creator wants them to go into. And when you do it as an organization, then we all should be on the same page, moving, as it were, from pasture to pasture where the grass is green, and that's what the shepherd does. Lets them eat in one place, but then when all the grass is chewed up, and that they move them elsewhere to chew up, then they come back. So that's my role. So when I'm thinking, slow down, Steve, is all year long, I'm like, where do I want to end up at the end of the year with this organization? What am I going to be feeding them? The God component is that He gives inspiration, gives ideas. So my job is to make sure I'm reading the manuscript, which is our Bible. And as I read that, there's things that come to light for me that I know, let me delve into because the organization needs it. The church needs this. Some of it, I don't personally have the revelation for, so I have to go study and see what others have said about it and get that, like reading a book or reading the concordance, what this writer is saying about this subject matter that then gives me an understanding. So I then have to sit down. So I start with a subject, all right? Overcomer. I know there's places in the Bible that talks about the overcomer. Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world, meaning I've got more power in me than the thing that's on the outside of me, so I can overcome it. So I start looking in the scripture. I find what helps me communicate it from the Bible, because I don't want to be sharing just some motivational speakers information. Yeah. I want to find out what the Creator has to say about that. Then I find that, and then I start looking at maybe a story, some scripture verses, but then a story that's going to help me now communicate. And then when I get into that story, either I find as I'm reading it, principles that help get through and get this message across, or I go and I find information that's going to help me do that. Once I get that, here's my 3 or 4 pieces, things I want to put out there and say. Then I'm looking some form of closing, and I'm like, okay, how can I wrap this up and bring it all together? So we start my format that, quite frankly, I saw you do early, and I liked it a lot better than the format I had, was we give an intro. After that intro, we share that passage. We find that passage, we put them out there because we want people to see this is coming from our Bible. Then I go into a story. That story has to somehow humanize this subject matter that we're going to be sharing. Okay?
Yep.
After that, we get into the nuts and bolts. That story probably is going to cause us to recognize a problem, right?
Yep.
We're going to see what a problem looks like in the story. Then we're going to figure out how to get out of that problem
into the solution.
Which I'm always huge on the solution side.
Gotta be.
I have a hard time with a person that just communicates the problem. I like to know, give me a solution, please. So I'm solution-minded. I want to get out of it. And then, of course, we bring in our ending. Chris, part of this, I used to do it a different way. Part of it was I would look at the way you would do it. And I would say, okay, that really works for a general audience. You grabbed hold of some real good voices out there that you adopted that same model from. I would go back and listen to some of the voices that I would listen to, and one in particular, can't remember his name right now, from South Africa or Africa. He would do the same, and I'm like, man, I liked it when I was in that environment. That's a great way to bring this communication to the people.
Yeah.
And so because you said to me earlier, how do you do it? How did you do it with me, Dad? The way that I was able to do this with you is because I received from you. Yeah, you're my kid. And at the time you were in your 20s. And I've heard a lot of good preachers. I'm not sure I enjoy listening to anybody right now as much as I enjoy listening to you. Yeah, no. Because, Chris, you're good. So look, you started flying at your elevation. I could not ask you to come down to a lower elevation. But you had to be flying there. Now, I know a lot of guys on my seat, pastors, they just throw their kids up there because of the last name. Jeez. That was never going to be the case with you. That's never going to be the case with Stephanie singing, or Lauren or Gabby in their gifting. It's not because they share the last name. They'll be given an opportunity. Yeah. They'll be given the time to learn it and to develop the skill, but they're never going to be put up there just because they have the last name. They have to carry it. Yeah. And you were carrying it at such a high elevation that it would have been wrong of me for this generation of leaders and people in our organization that are watching and are contributing, that are here. It would be wrong of me to not allow them to receive what you're bringing to the table at a high elevation and the generation that you speak to. They would miss out on this information if you weren't sharing it. And I always mention to you about the 10-year 10-year circle that I have, 10-year higher, 10-year lower, above and beneath. I know as a leader, I'm touching people 10 years older than I am and 10 years younger than I am. Yeah. You're doing the same. So my point was, from that, I'm 60 at this point. At that time, I was 50. I'm reaching 60 and I'm reaching 40. Who's reaching the 20s and the 30s? Yeah. There was nobody else in betweens. And here you come on the scene with the ability to communicate. And it's like, all right, let him speak. He's my DNA. He's got the same spirit that's in his mom and I. He's going to be able to share that and communicate it. He's gifted. Whatever's going on up in your brain, I tell people when they talk about what a good job you did when you speak, I would go in and look in your room and check your computer and see, okay, what preacher is he listening to? Where did he copy that sermon? I'd Google the title of that sermon. He copied it from somebody.
You did ask me for years. You'd be like, where did you copy?
Yeah, because most of us copy to start. But yours was a gift. So how do I not allow this organization to receive from you at this point? And may I say, let's close with this before we're done. How not to feel insecure as a senior leader when the junior leader's coming up with a gift that at almost 30 is equal to, if not even better. That's a big deal too. But
well, first of all, if we have Kenny the Bull, we need to have like Benny the Bunny for when our sweet moments, because that I don't think people recognize that you're the most effective communicator I've met.
Oh,
and the reason for that is you have really found a way to communicate things to me when it's just us that really, really shatter my thinking, that really, really change. When people do come up and give me, and I'm being as genuine as I can be,
I know.
When people come up and give me some type of compliment, they're speaking to the exact things that you taught me to do. Hard for me to take any credit.
Right.
It's hard for me to be like, well, the Lord is no, it's like people are like, you speak so mature for your age. And I'm like, well, that's because my dad told me to stop joking around so much.
Yeah.
So you told me something when I first got started, at that point, I was pure. And at that point, it was more pure by happenstance, not really by decision at that time. And you told me that revelation always comes through purity, and it would only come. That I'd always have the gifting, but that the revelation would only come through purity. And you would remind me of that every time I needed to be reminded of that. You're the most effective communicator because I believed you. I believed you. And now it was okay. This next season, I don't want to be robbed of the weight.
Right.
So, I hope that when parents or kids listen to this and they hear the kind things that you've said, they do not rush to put an unpure vessel in a position where purity is demanded.
Yeah.
You would communicate things to me. I remember you walking in my room at 25 saying, you'll never be anything if you can't get out of your own way. That's not an easy message to preach. But the only reason that your ministry is so effective is because you live out every one of those messages. And the only reason that I could ever really look at you and say, that's a really mean thing you just said to me, but you're right, is because you lived those things out first. So not to just go back and forth, patty caking on compliments, but Dad, I really do mean that.
Right. I got you, buddy. And I appreciate that. And there'll be a day when it won't be your dad you hear as much. As much as it's the one who called you to this. And that's, my job is to make sure that you're always listening to his voice. Not that I won't be here, but you'll step into that role where it won't be, well, my dad told me, and my dad said, it'll be, well, I heard from God, and I felt this in my heart, and that's a beautiful thing. I think from our standpoint, Chris, every senior leader needs to know something. 2 are better than 1.
Yeah.
And our organization is stronger, not just because me and Mom share in communication responsibilities, but because me, Mom, you, and eventually your sisters who have different skill sets. But right now, it's us 3 that are carrying the communicating. And we are better. 2, threefold cord is not easily broken. The organization is better. Now, if I don't like that because my ego can get bruised, that's mine to deal with.
Yeah.
I won't let that happen. I won't let that happen. Because any feelings that I may have of like, wow, I'm being replaced, or I'm not needed, I'm not near as valued, I'm getting too old, I'm aging out. Any of those thoughts that the voices will come to me and say, not just about you, your mom, watching Stephanie sing and writing music and songs and seeing then Gabby get up and Gabby lead like she's leading. Those voices come to every person that is a senior leader operating at an organization. When the next generation comes on with such strength, that's what you want. That's what you prepare for. What you can't do is sabotage it by going small. I remember Joseph Garlington preaching a sermon on small yourself up. Well, the small part of it is keeping our pride at bay. But I can't go so small in my thinking that I can't be looking at you and anyone else that in the family. Your mom can't do it about Steph, saying, look at their skill, their gift.
Yeah.
We need them. And this organization that we lead that gives continuously, they deserve the opportunity to see that the next generation is being prepared for.
Yeah.
We're just not going to wing it out there. We're going to keep our standards high. Because, Chris, if you couldn't do this, if you couldn't communicate, you wouldn't be on that stage as frequently as you are. But they deserve seeing what the next generation looks like, because they invest their dollars, not just because there's a building here. They invest it into us as leaders, and we want to make sure that they are getting a return on that investment, because your gifting and your skill gives me great pride. I'm proud of that. And I got to be careful that I don't get too proudful, because I don't want to exalt you either before your time.
But that's the balance that, and
it is.
That's what I'm so thankful for. I genuinely feel like I feel a lot of things, but I also feel like anyone who's 30 and thinks they got this whole thing figured out has a really small vision for the world. If I could figure it all out by 30. So I look at myself and say, I have a lot of room to grow. It's why I started my master's this week. I have a lot more I could learn, a lot more room to grow. And I know that in that form where I've got 10 years on this thing now, but I got a lot more to go. In that world, I'm safe here. I can be led here. I can follow well here. And I wonder, we've talked about writing a book together, working for and with dad, and then working with and for the son, something like that. In that whole thing, Dad, I really do feel like I can work for you. And you have told me in the past, you've reminded me, hey, you're not working, with me, son. You're working for me. Those developmental years, that wasn't a pride thing. That was making sure I got the most of all those seasons. And so, all that development happened. And I really do feel like, my wife and I are really good here.
Yeah.
We're safe here. And when we do have kids, I want them here.
Yeah.
That's
the sad thing. Some of the young guys working for their family, they have to go and try their own thing. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm listening to a couple of family business podcasts, and there's not too many of them that are out there. And I've searched and I've looked, and a couple start, but then they stop. And what usually happens with some of these multi-generational businesses is that the sibling, the child, graduates from school, and then they got to go find their own thing, and they go run their own business, or they go work for somebody else, only to later in their 40s sit back and say, my gosh, I need to go back to where I started. I had an opportunity there. And then they go back and they're playing catch up. Yeah, they bring certain skill sets to the table they may not have had, but maybe they would have if they would have stayed there. Maybe their roots would have been deeper if they stayed there, and they would have had even more skills because of now the opportunity that would have been given to them. I think our job, our line of work and ministry, I think it's multi-generational.
Yeah.
I really do. Not all businesses are, not all ministries are. I think ours is. I had my father, worked for him for 13 years, left him for 15, then went back and took over, and we've got 2 beautiful campuses to enjoy it today. I even thought at one time maybe that was just a single generation ministry there, but it's a multi-generational. So I work for my dad. I get the privilege of working in ministry, and then I have you behind us. And of course, our next goal is to get whatever comes out of you and your sisters prepared for that next generation, which is a whole podcast in itself.
Oh my gosh.
Because sleeve to sleeve means most businesses only last 3 generations. And there's a way, I think.
Most multi-generational businesses, most only last 1.
Yeah.
But most multi-generational only get to 3. They never even get to 4.
They don't get to 4.
We will get to 4.
We will, because I think there's another component that if we could lock into, that's a whole different podcast.
I can't wait to
I've already been thinking on it. If we can lock into it, then we don't have to stop with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. because that's not where the promise ended. It went on. Anyhow, one of the things we got to do is make sure we're protecting ourselves from the voices.
Yeah.
And the voices that are in our own head, but also the voices of people.
Yeah.
People unknowingly could cause a rift between the junior and the senior generation that are both sharing the same platform.
Yeah.
They can make ridiculous comments and they don't even realize. A spouse can make a comment and not even realize that they are driving a wedge between the two generations.
Yeah.
And that the senior generation needs to protect his platform because look what so-and-so saying to them, or the younger generation is saying, oh man, I want what they have and I'll never get it because so-and-so's telling me I'm really good. We're very open about that, you and I. We're open when those texts come from sweet people that mean well.
Yeah.
They do.
They're just trying to pay a compliment.
They're paying a compliment. They don't realize how the enemy will grab that thought and you're laying there in the middle of the night, can't sleep, and all of a sudden, boom. It's like a replay of that whole conversation by text, and you're thinking, well, maybe I do deserve it. Well, yeah, it's a unique role that we both share, and I'm cool sharing it with you. I'm cool sharing it with your mom. I've been doing it a long time. I'm not done. You're just beginning.
Yeah.
No, you've been doing this for a bit. You're not just beginning.
No, I was going to say, you worked for Papa 13 years. I just made 10 last week.
Yeah.
Almost to 13.
Almost to 13. Yeah. We don't want you to get to 13 and blow it up. It's not going to be unlucky 13.
No. We're going to redeem that number.
But let me ask you, before we close this thing out, give a quick rundown. How do you prepare your message?
Okay. This is going to sound insane, but it's...
Remember, somebody is listening that needs direction here.
Yeah.
So go. Give them the nuts and bolts.
Okay, number one, make sure you're actively in the Word for your own study and edification. Make sure that you do not sit down to read the Word only when you need to put a thought together. Most of, this might not make any sense, most of the messages that God gives me, I'm not reading the Bible.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking.
Oh, I got it.
But it's because I've been reading that all of a sudden, I'm having a conversation with Rochelle or something's happening and boom, it's there. So
at the same time, you never want to use your reading time
for that
personal devotion just to find a sermon.
No.
Got to feed yourself first before you can feed others.
Yeah.
Go.
You've got to have a relationship with God.
Yep.
That, and forgive me for not using a better term, but that should be envied. Other people need to look at the way that I, as a preacher, walk with God and say, that's how I want to walk with God. So that's got to happen.
Number one.
Number one. But once a thought hits, once something comes, I really do, I think, okay, how do I connect people to this? That used to be through stories that had nothing to do with the message, but there was a component that I could transition. Lately, it's turned more into how do I make the person listening to this message feel like they're actually watching this story unfold, or even better, how do I get to where this person feels like whatever the main character of the story is, that's them. Mm-hmm. So I really do look at how do I connect with people? That starts mostly with me doing that. What would have I thought? What would have I felt? And I have to be completely honest as possible. If I was Abraham and God came and asked me for Isaac, what would I think?
Yeah.
What would I feel? And have to be as honest as I possibly can be, because that's probably what other people are feeling.
Right.
So once that comes, there's the connection portion. It's like you said, now I've got to really develop the problem. Now I've got to think, okay, people need to see the value of this message. If it's solution-minded without a problem, there is no point for your message. I literally walked in, patted everyone on the back and said, way to go. So I have to develop the problem. This is something that you taught me to do. I have to connect the problem to every person in the room because not everyone has the same problem. So you literally taught me, say, maybe it's your school teacher, maybe it's your addictions, maybe it's this. So once I've connected every person to that, I actually don't have to spend too much time connecting people to the problem, because if they feel like they're in that story, their spirit and their brains are doing that for them now. And then, of course, it's the solution-minded. That has really started to change as I've preached, and I guess the revelation's gotten different to where it's not, it really is developing one thought that becomes so many, and it's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different.
Yeah. And then how do you close it out?
I have to close it out by pointing back to whatever the one thing is.
Mm-hmm.
I have to let somebody know when they leave here today. You know, when people try to describe what a TED Talk was, they normally say, you just got to watch it.
Yeah.
That kind of preaching is not really effective.
No.
If people think they had to be there to understand, so I have to bring back people to what that one thing is.
Yeah. And I hope you will always stay in that posture of a communicator, because it's one thing to preach. Preach is sometimes just shouting, trying to get your point across. Communicating is, okay, let me get you to understand this, because in today's day, we've got people that are listening to us with all different kinds of voices that are going on. There's a lot of chatter, and we got to get through that chatter to help people hear something that is not necessarily what we're saying, but is more deity.
Yeah.
That is heaven trying to say something into their situation. Well, that's a true blessing, and I'm thankful that this is something that you and I can work on, and we're aware of it. And it is, we discuss it. We talk about it quite a bit.
Quite often.
You'll notice when we come off that platform, we're all giving each other some, hug, compliments, praise for what happened. We're very sensitive to it. And again, this is not just you and I. This is your mom and the sisters who are singing and taking leadership. And whether it's preaching, singing, or stinking Gabby's leading, it's easy to see, wow, what gifting is coming up behind us. And
I'm
it's
the
our
one
job.
with a degree in psychology, and yet somehow Lauren is becoming the one that everyone wants to talk to psychology about because she's wicked brilliant. So it's across the board.
It is. And isn't that something we all got to talk ourselves off the cliff? We can't feel less than. And speaking of, you had a degree in psychology, but you didn't have anything when it comes to theology. You had some classes going on. I asked you guys, I wanted to make sure you were balanced in your theology. So I said, hey, let's go to Faith Christian University. So you started taking classes. COVID came, kind of messed things up there. But now we had a conversation about a month and a half ago. Lauren's pursuing her master's in counseling. And we're like, Chris, you got time now.
Yeah.
Let's get your master's.
Yep.
If you're going to write a book, you're going to be leading as a pastor. It sure
sounds nice.
Because now people can listen to you, because this guy's done some work behind the scenes to prepare him for the material. So you are pursuing your master's in theology from Liberty University.
Yes, I am. Started yesterday.
Yep. And it's worth the investment from our church to give you incentives to pursue your education. We want you to be sharp.
And I just want everyone listening to hear what he just said. The only reason people would listen to me, technically right now, people listen. But I love that your leadership of me says, but there's a greater amount of people. And so the leadership does not end because I'm turning 30 or because I'm getting pretty good at it. There's continued leadership. He taught me just a couple of months ago, he taught me how to pray better for my messages. Right before I preach, I go up and I say a quick prayer. He corrected, John, the way that I pray for that message.
Coached, not corrected.
It was
coached.
corrected. And I love it because he's right. And every single time I'm praying, I'm thinking, gosh, this is way better. So everyone listening, if you're a senior leader, please keep coaching your kids because they always need it.
All right, we're 37 minutes and 9 seconds into this thing. Thank you for joining us for another Family Business Podcast with
The Alessis.
The Alessis. Take care.